Hello and welcome to the Siwi Sofa, where we sit down with some of the most interesting participants at the World Water Week to learn more about the array of water-related issues being discussed this week in Stockholm. My name is Eric Paglia, host of the Siwi Sofa, and the name of this session is Mountains, Glaciers, and Hydropower in a Changing Climate, Insights from the Himalayas. It's a session convened by ISIMOD, and joining me we have three representatives from this organization. We have Dr. David Moulton, the Director General of the International Center for Integrated Mountain Development. We have Dr. Eklavya Sharma, Director of Program Operations at ISIMOD, and Dr. Aditi Mukherjee, the theme leader of Water and Air at ISIMOD. Welcome all to the Siwi Sofa.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Very nice to have you here. And perhaps we could start by discussing the importance of the Himalayas in the overall water situation and water supply generation in Asia. Sometimes they're referred to as the water towers of Asia. Is that an accurate description?
Indeed it is. The Himalayas cover, our region covers 8 different countries, right, stretching from Afghanistan clear to Myanmar, and people don't think of Myanmar having glaciers and mountains, but it's true. So we have Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, China, Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, and Myanmar as our member countries looking at the mountains and the hills. The region has more, outside of the North Pole and South Pole, it has more snow and ice than any other region on Earth, and sometimes it's called the third pole region for that name. But also, starting from the mountain areas are 10 major river basins, right, coming off for example, the Indus, the Ganges, the Brahmaputra, the Yellow, Yangtze, Mekong rivers, to name a few of them, come from this mountain areas. So we have about 200 million people living in those mountains. That's already a lot, but about 1.3 billion people living downstream depending on mountain resources. So it's an incredibly important resource base, yes, for water resources, obviously, but other factors as well. For example, there's huge potential for hydropower development, the potential energy in this region. There's also huge biodiversity and agricultural biodiversity in the region. And of course, the people themselves in the region are incredibly diverse, incredibly adaptable and resilient, something we can all learn from these mountain people. Our motto at ISIMOD is then for mountains and people. In other words, we deal with mountain environments and mountain people. It's an area that, when we think about climate change, is under threat. It's highly vulnerable to climate change. The people in the mountains are not the ones emitting the greenhouse gases, but in a way they're already paying the price for climate change as we're moving ahead. Some of the issues we see are melting snow, melting ice, melting permafrost in the region, but also changes in rainfall patterns that will make a big difference in this area. And we see a lot more hazards, say landslides, in the area that's in part from climate change as well. So it's an area that we really have to pay attention to. And I would say I was really happy with the Stockholm Water Week that did put mountains on the agenda this time. It's actually not a topic that's very often discussed at these Water Week meetings.
And one of the main themes of this session here is the Hindu Kush Himalayas in particular. And of course, climate change is happening all over the world in the Himalayas and elsewhere. But why is this particular region so crucial when it comes to climate change?
Well, it surely is one of the most vulnerable regions to climate change, and then we already think about the melting glaciers, right? And the impacts on the water resources downstream for mountain people in those downstreams are quite serious. It's also a place where you see a lot of migration of people out of the mountains areas, and that part of that is just the difficult climate and environment and other opportunities elsewhere. But it is that migration that we're concerned about. If you think about the energy and produced from the water resources in the mountains, it's incredibly important for the Asia region, but by extension, very important for the global community as well to take care of this resource base, the Himalayas.
I mean, melting glaciers are sort of an icon of climate change around the world, in the Himalayas and elsewhere. How will this affect the region in over the next 30 to 50 years? The ecologies and the societies in the greater Hindu Kush Himalaya region. And I put that out to all members of the panel if anyone would
Yeah.
like to weigh in.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think one issue that I just wanted to point out, we have climate change, but that climate change is on top of all kinds of other changes that are happening in the region. So for example, the migration of people out of mountains, the globalization, the increased connectivity of people. So we're seeing more and more roads. I was in an isolated area in the mountains. I thought people were putting in water cables, but it was actually fiber optic cables connecting China with people in Nepal. So the region is changing rapidly with a lot of challenges. On top of that is climate change. So it's a issue that's compounding many challenges that we face in the region. But maybe others would like to come in.
Yes, I think climate change has brought a lot of consciousness and awareness among the countries, and they understand climate change is not a particular country's problem, it's a problem of all the countries. So they are seeing more and more value of cooperation between the countries. So we see lots of risks, challenges, threats because of climate change, but it has also provided opportunities for the countries to cooperate. And now you can see countries like India, China, they are coming up with lots of projects and opportunities for cooperating in this region. So I see very much there is some positive movement to address climate change in the region, both in perspective of policies as well as something on the ground. So its action on the ground is very, very important. For instance, in case of India, they have very much established one of the mission called Sustaining Himalayan Ecosystems. So where all mountain states and national different missions are coming together to address the issues of the Himalayan region. And in that mission, very clearly, they also talk about they need to cooperate with the neighboring countries. So in that context, the only institution which is the ICIMOD, the International Center Intergovernmental Organization, has that mandate, and it really gives us a lot of ownership and opportunity for us to work. So I see lots of good opportunities for addressing the issues of climate change and the type of other drivers which are equally important because they contribute also to the changes of in the region. So I would say land use, land cover change, urbanization within the mountains itself. So it is now actually asking for more resources and more better planning. So we see many, many drivers, but there are also drivers like globalization, which has now brought lots of these digital services, which are actually can be achieved in anywhere in the mountains. So I would see, I think as we move forward, there are opportunities of cooperation between the communities from one country to the other countries, private sectors coming in a big way. In my opinion, you can take example of travel tourism, where a number of country travel agencies are cooperating and actually in these mountain systems. So I think we have to take that opportunity to really address the issues of climate change. Most importantly, I think the policies. We have global agreements, and how we are going to implement those in the region are going to be critical, and how complementary policies are made between the countries to address the climate issues in the mountains. Addressing related to that is quite important. Finally, I think data is very important. Information is important. That has provides the evidences for good policy making, and ICIMOD has actually started working very much to generate data information in better quality data, consistent, comparable, representing the region. I think these are quite important, and those evidences and data information then finally can be used in proper designing, planning and policy processes in the countries.
I wanted to give some concrete examples of not only climate change but also some of the other socio-economic changes that we are talking about, say urbanization, male specific out migration on livelihoods of the people at the very local level. One of the examples is Nepal and India and many of the mountain countries have had centuries-old farmer-managed irrigation systems, which had very intricate and robust rules for various kinds of, how to manage those irrigation systems. One of the impacts of male-specific outmigration has been that the water rights are still with the male household heads, while increasingly women are managing those irrigation systems. So there is a kind of a vacuum, a void of what happens when your male irrigators go out, but the women are forced to manage those systems. So we find because they do not have commensurate rights to those irrigation systems, many of those are actually declining. And that decline is actually exacerbated by many of the extreme climate events. Even earthquake last year destroyed many of these farmer managed irrigation schemes. Another important water related issue that is emerging a lot, and which is also at the intersection of both climate change as well as socio-economic changes, is that of drying up of springs in the mid hills. Springs are absolutely the most important source of water for people there, and things like haphazard unplanned infrastructure construction, be it roads, be it hydropower, without proper planning and understanding, has been disrupting these springs, and much of the brunt of this excess work actually falls on the woman. So when we talk of climate change, I think understanding that the impacts of climate change are not equally shared amongst everyone is also very important to remember, that women often are at the receiving end of climate change phenomena.
Another effect of climate change that's being discussed is the impact on the development of hydropower potential in the region. How can these challenges be mitigated so that the region can actually utilize the potential of the water resources that way?
Yeah, what we talked a lot about in our last section was the risk to, say, hydropower investment. And the hydropower companies are increasingly concerned about a number of risks. But I think the first step, there's still very much potential to get that power generated, but a first step is to understand those risks. So a first kind of risk is the changes in the hydrology, the changes in water resources that comes from the glacier melt. And it was curious in the session that while glaciers are melting, it actually brings down more water in the rivers for a short time, and then later the glacial contribution gets less to the river systems. And some of the climate models are predicting more rainfall in the future, so that might compensate the hydropower companies. But other kinds, so there's a need to do that assessment for hydropower companies to see if they can invest. The other kinds of risk we were exploring were, say, around disasters, right? Because the area is vulnerable to what we call glacier lake outburst floods, where the water from the glacier melts and forms a lake that might drain and cause damage to hydropower. Now, it's possible in the designs to mitigate that risk as well. And then another kind of risk is just a societal risk, the perceptions of people about hydropower. Does the hydropower benefit local communities or not? So we had a really interesting discussion on benefit sharing and how to reduce that perception risk from hydropower as well. Maybe
benefit sharing at the local level is very important, and the reason is because actually if communities perceive that they are not going to receive commensurate benefits from hydropower, they have enough political power to stop construction or to obstruct operation of those hydropower plants. So I think while many of the hydropower companies would pay a lot more attention to the hydrological risks, I think they have to pay equal attention to the risk of societal discontent. And for that, we find in Nepal and India, where we have done some studies, that the government and the hydropower companies have been providing certain kind of benefits, but those benefits work best when the benefits go directly to the community instead of going to a very big central fund and then the government redistributes it. So direct contribution from the hydropower projects directly to the community, say to the village development funds, or to building roads or infrastructure for the villages, or giving equity shares in the hydropower projects for the communities, works much better than another model where the hydropower company directly pays to the government, and that then it is expected that the benefits would trickle down to the communities.
There's also expected to be quite a few impacts on the biodiversity of the region due to climate change. Have you mapped those at all? What do you expect will be the consequences?
Yes, I think this is a very important topic. If you see globally, there are 34 global hotspots. Out of 34, 4 hotspots are in the Hindu Kush Himalayan region. And we have very clearly seen that climate change impact on the biodiversity is very clear. We have seen in case of oak forest, change of 1 degree temperature rise actually wipes out in southern zone the oak forest. When we say oak, then it is also harboring, providing habitat for other species to foster. So we see lots of change that is already happening in the region. We also see that as temperature is rising, the species range is shifting. From lower elevation, actually they are moving upwards, and those species which are already very much high in the elevation, they are likely to be disappearing in future, and some of them are also disappearing. So climate change with the other type of stresses, I would say, are combined the impact on some of the species, especially the high altitude species. And when you see the Hindu Kush Himalayan region, you can actually see and categorize where is the maximum threat. The timber line, we call it, the species they have, and the trees goes to a certain level, and after that there is no trees anymore. That is the most fragile region for climate change impact on species, and many valuable species like medicinal aromatic plants grow there. One good example of that elevation is Yarsa gomba, we call it cordyceps, the Himalayan gold, we call it. The value of that particular caterpillar plant, fungus, is as much as sometimes $70,000 to $80,000 for kilogram. So it's a huge resource, and there is really an impact on such elevations with such resources. So biodiversities are really threatened. So this is one type of livelihood linked biodiversity. Then you can also see those species which are globally very, very important, umbrella species like snow leopards. We have many other species. So their habitat is also either getting fragmented or they are getting squeezed. These animals also move. They have a wide range from one mountain region to another mountain region. So if the climate change is impacting certain areas, the movement of these animals horizontally as well as vertically are affected. So in that context, I think biodiversity is being impacted quite a lot. In high altitude areas, one of the major changes that we see is on wetlands, and we have wetlands which are glacial fed wetlands, and we have wetlands which are not glacial fed. We already see that some of the wetlands are shrinking, but those wetlands which are linked with the glaciers, actually they are expanding. So the biodiversity which is actually related to these wetlands, aquatic biodiversity, we see that because of warming, the species composition is also changing. The other threat that we have seen from climate change in terms of biodiversity is invasive species. Many alien species are actually coming, and they are actually dominating and removing the more useful species, especially in high altitude rangelands, where we have yaks, we have many different types of cattle, and livelihood is very strongly linked. So their species composition is changing. And then these invasive species are actually impacting very much on the quality of fodder, quality of resource for the livestock, and it is also related to production. So we can see lots of impact already happening in biodiversity. I can tell you, I mean, there is so much of phenological changes also. Because of milder winter, we already see that some of our peaches, they are flowering in non-season situation, which is normally has to flower in April, but you can see flower and fruits already in December. So we have seen such phenological changes actually happening, and that is also impacting on production of some good crops which are related to that region. One of the major impacts that I see in terms of species in that region is that more and more we are seeing diversity is becoming less in those areas where people are also having habitation near those areas. So the effort from the countries are that more areas are put under protected area management, and to link with the people, there is a good Man in the Biosphere program has come with biosphere reserves, where there are areas where people can interact, like tourism can interact in nature, very nice areas. So there are areas which are designated for doing tourism. So in the context of these challenges, there are also some of the possibilities where we can address these issues. So now we know about the climate change. So from our institution point of view, ICIMOD has a transboundary landscape management program across all the Hindu Kush Himalayan region. We have 6 transboundary landscapes covering 7 countries out of 8 countries of ICIMOD already engaged in transboundary landscape management. And sometimes when we do transboundary landscape management, it is a holistic, integrated ecosystem-based approach where we try to address water as well as biodiversity and the aspirations of people in terms of their livelihoods together. So we see these efforts which has come from ICIMOD in ecosystem management, addressing livelihoods of the people from biodiversity and agriculture, and then also trying to see the change over the years. We have a long-term social and ecological monitoring systems framework that we have developed, and in each of these landscapes we are trying to work with the partners to have such systems to generate data and information which can then provide evidence and support to the national policy as well as design of programs. So definitely I think the biodiversity being a very important natural element of the Hindu Kush Himalayan region needs special attention.
I mean, given all these range of changes that are well underway at this point, how do you see the future of the region over the next 30 to 50 years? And what changes do you think are required for making the region's growth sustainable?
You know, I think the way to do this is to look at the future and see a future where people are taking advantage of the mountain resources. This is a tremendous resource base, and as far as the water, the energy. So we can see in the future a place where human well-being, human health, human happiness is very much improved by balancing the conservation of those resources with the development. Now, that's the way we have to look at the future, right? A prosperous region and the resources are maintained. The question is how to get there, what steps to be taken. Now, one piece of we have this mountain region that's shared by 8 countries, right? So one of the big steps is cooperation between the countries to manage that shared resource better. Now, we have seen recently, and actually with climate change, this has come up as something positive, that countries are concerned very much about their mountain resources. They want to learn from each other what's going on, what's happening with the glaciers, what's happening with biodiversity. So actually that offers an opportunity where the countries together can learn how to manage the resources better. And we actually do see that happening. So a very positive move in that direction. Then also there's steps now, or people are learning how to manage, for example, hydropower better. How can countries exchange knowledge about, say, benefit sharing, how the people can do better with hydropower. Then yes, there's a lot of mountain risks, a lot of mountain changes, but there are also very much opportunities with high-valued mountain products. For example, the herbs you were talking about. Even with climate change, you can grow apples up at higher elevations. So somehow people have to get linked with the market. That's happening with globalization. So the idea is to turn those risks, to turn the challenges into opportunities, to see that world 30 years from now, 50 years from now, we're a place where, yes, people are coming back to enjoy the mountains and to prosper in mountainous areas.
So there are at least couple of things that we should completely avoid in the mountains. One is not really go for fossil fuel development. So there has to be a lot of emphasis on development of renewable energy, and mountains have this advantage vis-a-vis hydropower. So that I see as an important way going forward. And another interesting thing about these 8 countries is that when you talk about water and energy, all of them have all of them have high hydropower potential, and they also have different kind of energy mix. Some countries like India and China have more of thermal, other countries like Nepal and Bhutan are on hydropower, and their requirements are also different. The peakedness of demand is different. In the colder countries, in the mountain countries like Bhutan and Nepal and Afghanistan, you need more energy during the winter for heating purposes, while in the more warmer countries you need more energy during the summer for irrigation and cooling purposes. So that kind of offers a very good opportunity for regional cooperation around energy issues. So if that happens, and there are a lot of indications that now the energy treaties are going beyond bilateral to more multilateral levels, so that would be one positive change that can entirely change the face of the region. So at the heart of it is really transboundary cooperation of the countries having to work together. The other thing I see is migration is often painted as something negative, but that need not necessarily be so. What's also happening is with all the out migration, lot of remittance money is coming in, and a lot of them get invested in positive things. For example, a lot of it gets invested in improving agricultural practices or for starting some kind of sustainable agribusiness. So that is the second, and the third one would be improvements in information and technology. That also would change the face of the mountain in the next 30-50 years.
I think when I look into the mountains, one of the thing that we have to really see is how we can retain the youths in the mountains. What are the opportunities for the youth in terms of their engagement, their employment in the mountains? If we address that issue, I think the mountains have a bright future. The regional cooperation was mentioned by both of my colleagues, and there I would see that next 20 to 50 years time there has to be a free movement of people in the region. Like the European Union, you have that similar, and for our region, if we have that situation, I think there are much more win-win situation for the region, in my opinion. So number of opportunities which we see right now are all transboundary. We have to grow as one region. Then only I think the benefits can really come. High value products, which was mentioned by Dr. Malden, it is coming from Nepal, but it has to go to India or China to really get its market or international flow. So similarly, we have lots of strengths in Nepal which others don't have. For instance, community forestry is a very important management approach which Nepal has devolved also. And that example can go to other countries where we lack that type of opportunity. So it's learning very much at the community level, at the institution level, at the national, between the government level, with more free movement in terms of the exchange. That will provide lots of opportunity. I think the region has lot of potential, but there has been very little investment going to the mountains. So in future, if mountains receive the investment for organic farming, green growth approach, so that we retain the environmental sustainability, ecosystem services from the mountains, and still the region can bring lots of economic development for the people in the mountains, as well as for the people who are living in downstream. It was mentioned 1.3 billion people live in the downstreams. If the mountains are good, 1.3 billion people will also have a good situation. If mountains suffer, those people will also suffer. There will be more floods. There will be less water for irrigation. So food security will be impacted. So we have to see very holistically. The region has to see, the countries have to see it as a holistic. And ICIMOD is, of course, there to really make that happen. With good data, good information, good evidence, we convene the countries together to discuss on these issues. So I see there is a bright future for that region, and I think everybody has to own it.
And and surely the focus on water at this conference has an opportunity to, I mean, it is a way to unlock many of these opportunities. Use water for the high valued products, create some business opportunity for young people is a way to move forward. Reduce the risks from water development, pay attention to that, is an opportunity for investments to take place in mountain areas. And so I believe the water community should also pay a lot of attention to what happens for mountains, for the sake of mountains, but also for Asia, downstream, our region, and the globe.
Well, I'd like to thank you all for a very interesting conversation on a fascinating region in flux, a very critical, important region, not just for the region itself, but for the greater Asian region. So thanks for joining us here in the Siwi Sofa.
Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And thanks for tuning in to the Siwi Sofa. Stay tuned throughout the World Water Week for more episodes.